So we would love to hear from you. We would welcome questions or comments. I think we're going to use the microphones up on the floor and give you a moment to collect your thoughts, but we welcome your questions about NSF, any of our programs, or anything you've seen while you've been here over the past few days.
Great. All right. Peace out. There we go.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the effort to bring us together. I know it's a lot of work, and thanks to Cadre. So Phil Bell, University of Washington. I guess I just want to put a trend on the table that I see in our field. It's around attending. It relates to like science and broadening participation, and that good work that NSF has been opening up over the last handful of years specifically. There's a growing number of scholars. We've had scholars doing it for a while, but like a kind of young scholars taking up kind of a socio-political framing of learning and education. So if you think of like the Power and Privilege in the Learning Sciences book that came out a year and a half ago is emblematic of that. And there's like a lot of energy to figure out like how do you disrupt like the problematic framing and positioning of youth in particular environments? How do you understand how solidarities form within improvement projects or partnerships? That's important to theoretically understand. And so I just kind of want to signal the theory and method implications of attending to the socio-political. We ran a faculty search this year around this topic, and we had 130 apps, and 50 of them were fully responsive. And so it feels like in learning sciences there is a groundswell in that direction. I just kind of am wondering if it's showing up in the applications, showing up in your programs. Like in includes, I would think that it's centering there, if not elsewhere. So I'm just kind of putting that on the table as like a trend that I'm wondering how you're thinking about it.
Thank you. Who'd like to go first?
Includes Julio?
Do you want to start, Catherine?
I can. And I hope, Phil, that I'm answering or it's starting to address your question. So I think that the issues around broadening participation, I think you've heard it from a lot of us that this is really central. It's increasingly central. I'm looking over there now at Oki Lee. And one of the interesting things that Oki has said, many interesting things you have said, but recently a conversation around some of the language that is used and that we are using at NSF. And I was really impressed by the idea that, there are times we talk about things, words, nouns of diversity and equity, but there's no action with those words. And I don't know if one of the things that I find really interesting is the awareness that you brought to us, Oki, about that we're broadening participation. We're including. And these are things that are really taking this issue and moving it away from sort of nouns to action. And this is really permeating, I think, our consciousness and our awareness, and it's a conversation that happens across programs. I will specifically address ASL, because if you are submitting to the Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program and you articulate that your program has the goal, an outcome of broadening participation, we also require that you describe and discuss the needs and issues that this particular target group you're wanting to work with, support, enhance, contribute to, share with. But not only that, so it means like you're just not landing and we're gonna save these people. We are actually here with you. And I think the other aspect is then, so what are the strategies then? How are you really working with, or how are you enacting this? And I think that that's really important. It's required both within the proposal, but it's also something that the reviewers also have to critically address and respond to. So I think we're taking these steps. They're built in some of our program solicitations, and I'll let other people comment elsewhere.
So turn to Julio, do you want to?
Yeah, as I was, just for the fairness of the interaction, I think I heard first a very broad question with a rather lengthy introduction, and I don't want to miss the essence of the question itself. So would you please ask in a very, like...
I use my teacher voice. In the learning sciences field, we see this shift happening around theory and method to attend to socio-political circumstances of learning and teaching. It's a growing emphasis within junior scholars especially, but like opening up lines of work with Carol Lee and Chris Gutierrez and others have opened up historically.
Right.
And like, I'm just as a senior faculty person in this community, worried about spaces where they can find a place to get their work funded. It is good, it's the good work, right? It's some of the good work, but there's other good work. But so that's where the question is coming from. And I'm hoping that you're sensing that in the applications and in the proposals coming.
And you might also talk about includes a bit, Julio.
What was that?
You might also talk about includes, give an update.
Yes, I was thinking of giving you an example of includes, which focuses on building infrastructures and educational settings with emphasis and special focus on underserved populations. And the various calls are very, very explicit. This is not only another program, but an NSF-wide initiative that permeates all that we do, and including the review criteria. To go beyond what includes, and we can talk about this later, as an NSF-wide initiative, each of our programs have very specific guidelines on addressing diversity and underpopulations, and especially the learning and teaching processes. To give you an example, and David would kind of add on this, the program Heit has a very specific review criteria that is used during the process of assessing proposals, and includes is very, very clear. And my own analysis of each of our programs documents NSF's interest in targeting these populations. I sort of gave you a different sort of answer to your question, but I wanted to cover both includes and how we approach the issue.
Sorry. Yeah, fire away.
So I just want to jump in to say that recently Celeste P. led some efforts around professional development for faculty who are looking at questions of learning in the biological sciences, but I think it applies more broadly to all of the sciences and math and engineering and technology around minority serving institutions, many of whom are looking at questions of broadening participation. And one of the things, my experience of why proposals don't fare well, because I think this is as important as what we're seeing. We do get a lot of proposals. A couple of things I see about why proposals don't fare well around broadening participation. The actual aspects of broadening participation that we see in some of these proposals are under-theorized. There's a lot of assumptions, but very little theory about why an intervention should work with the population that is of interest. A lot of essentialization of students. So the assumption that boys are gonna like basketball or girls are gonna like textiles or whatever, without real depth of understanding from a perspective about what the actual kids in that community might be interested in, and understanding there are individual differences within those groups. So that would be one aspect of just generally under-theorizing. And then not justifying why the intervention or activity or approach is designed to actually maximize work with that particular community. So why are you targeting this particular activity for English language learners? And is it appropriate for all English language learners at every stage of being an English language learner? So I think there's a broad interest, but we are also not going to sacrifice rigorous research. And so I'm excited to see some of the proposals I've been getting from people who are really thinking hard about how their research is going to advance the theory. But it's, I've had also to communicate with PIs, it's very easy to slip into advocacy and not be doing research. And we fund research, and so it's important for people who are proposing to be willing to tolerate that their hypothesis might be wrong. And often proposals are structured in a way where they are only going to allow for confirmation of the hypothesis about what might work well with what students, and not allow for disconfirming evidence. So there's a lot of assumption that we already know the answer, and that's not research. I mean, it's interesting sometimes work, but it's not research. And so remembering that this is a research enterprise and really being willing to have the answer not be what you might want it to be has to be part of what the design of the study. So while we do get lots of proposals, sometimes when they don't do well, those are some of the reasons I see that them not doing well. And so I think it's really important for them to be well theorized and really designed as a research study and not as an advocacy project.
Okay, we'll have one last response, then hopefully we'll have
Sorry,
some more
Phil.
questions.
So there's one other component that I think people actually miss, and it may come as a surprise. They miss the STEM content, right? So they'll come in and make an interesting set of claims about who they're going to work with and how they're going to work with them and why it's important, and even be theorized well, but they don't tell you what they're going to do with them. And so I think it's a weird integration of lots of different layers to pull off a proposal in this space or any space. But if you underspecify in a fundamental way the STEM content, which is central to our mission, then you're dead in the water. So.
Okay, thanks. Okay, one last.
Thanks.
And then,
I just want to give two quick
Yeah.
sort of other kinds of answers. One, just in response to Julio's notion about special review criteria for iTest. The reason we have done that is to make it required that people actually identify the particular groups that they're targeting and what they know about the needs of those groups and how the project is going to be responsive to that particular need. So the whole purpose of those special review criteria is to address that very issue. The other thing, just as a phenomenon issue, in terms of socio-political kinds of activities, I have seen an increase in a number of projects that have students investigating their neighborhoods and mapping resources and distribution of goods around their towns. And though it's not deliberately socio-political in nature, it informs them about the nature and the structure of the communities in which they live, and I think that's a good thing.
thanks, David. So let's see if there's some more questions or comments.
Just an observation about this topic. A couple of review panels that I've been on, proposals that are coming from minority-serving institutions or young researchers who are addressing broadening participation questions get triaged, and therefore those investigators do not get the benefit of a full panel review. I think that's a disservice to them. I think if we want them to submit again, and do so in a more informed way. And the review panel can choose not to triage. So it's our responsibility too. But I guess I would just encourage us to take that responsibility very seriously.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything? Ron?
I'd like to say something.
Okay, Joe, even better, yeah.
Great point. I would just point out that the Hispanic serving institutions panels that we ran for this first year, there was no triage option. Yeah. For that very reason.
Sure, yes, yeah.
Well, let me address that a little bit. We are aware, and what we've done over the last year, Karen King just mentioned it a few minutes ago, we went out to do some capacity building at the minority serving institutions, and we were able to get to actually work with over 100 institutions, mostly HBCUs. And we are aware of the condition that you're talking about. And in many cases, we have learned quite a bit about why the conditions are the way they are and what are some of the things that we can do. In the next couple of weeks, we will be getting together with some of the other divisions to talk about what can be done to increase the capacity of those institutions to become more competitive.
Thanks. Let me also talk for a moment about early career. Faculty, I will perhaps channel what Barry would say, but I just want you to know that we would love to see more proposals from early career researchers to our career program. First of all, so who's a career awardee here? I've met some already, and congratulations. We're so happy to see the successes of researchers who are supported by our early career program, and I'll tell you that what is limiting that, the reason we don't have more people supported career, it is limited by the number of great fundable proposals that we get. That is really the limit. It's not a financial limit, so that there's no ceiling other than the whole budget really to how many career proposals we can fund. If you're early career yourself, or if you know someone who's early career and is potentially thinking whether they should send something to career or not, and it can be intimidating because it's a 5-year project and you need to integrate research and education, we would love to see more career proposals. Yeah, Barry, yeah.
There's other questions here. We have another question.
Yeah, here.
I'm wondering, I have one comment and maybe one question. So I understand the tensions between the advocacy and the research. I'm Associate Dean for Research and Community Engagement, but I think I also see the responsibility of PIs to responding to the needs of the community. So if there are, I would also encourage people that if we're running into, as a lead PI, we had requests from the communities to continue with the level 3 of the curriculum. We had not proposed that to NSF. That was not part of our proposal, but when communities are also asking for things to happen, then I would say my first reaction was, yes, let me find a way to make this happen for the community. And at the same time, not losing sight of the goals and the scope of the work that was proposed initially. So I think finding that advocacy and research balance is going to be really critical, but also keeping in mind that piece of responding to the community's needs. What I would also like to know is what are plans from NSF to be able to share the findings that we report from broadening participation, because we are funded through ITEST and through STEM+C, but I think there's also programs through DRK-12 and other programs that focus on broadening participation. So what are plans from the actual NSF to then be able to share those findings more widely, what's happening across programs?
Thanks. Did you want to start? There's a comment about advocacy.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll make a couple of comments. I think it's important for researchers to work with practitioners, communities, families, to do work that will advance the improvement of education of all students. And one might call that advocacy. But the concern in proposals that we see is that if you frame your proposed intervention as a success from the beginning, And then you say, what my project is to spread this success, but I'm going to study its efficacy. You've already decided it's efficacious, so you don't need to study it. You're just doing advocacy. That's not an NSF proposal. If you have done some research and you have some evidence that supports the efficacy, you're supposed to, as part of your proposal, have a broader impacts plan, which would include then sharing your results broadly with people, which may then be supporting communities. But it's actually, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, irresponsible to spread activities that we don't have evidence of success, particularly for underserved communities, because often they're sold a lot of snake oil about what things are going to do for kids that they don't do, and then we're actually disadvantaging children. So it's important to have a researcher's stance about even what you're going to broadly share, because it's really bad to broadly share things that are going to harm kids. And that happens enough already, and we shouldn't be part of that. So let me put that in one corner. NSF, in terms of dissemination, while we do things through our Office of Legislative and Public Affairs, dissemination is part of the broader impacts expectation of projects. And so I would turn the question back to the audience and say, what are you doing to broadly share your research results with broader communities? Are you reaching out to practitioner journals or only publishing in research journals? How many people are publishing in like the CAPN or places that are more likely to reach audiences that are more directly on the front lines of policy and practice, and not just talking to each other? It's great to talk to each other, and we think that's important too, but really thinking about what does it mean to have broader impacts and not just the narrow impacts on the people that we already are looking at. And then for those of you who are more senior, how do you consider that in things like promotion and tenure cases? When somebody has an article in Mathematics Teacher, do you think that's not as important as the article in the Journal for Research in Mathematics Education? Because that's an institutional power that you have to really say, we think this is important. So when you're writing that letter for the candidate, are you considering how they're really being impactful broadly? And if you're a reviewer, as Dan was just talking about, how are you looking at what they say their broader impacts were for their previous project when they go for their next project? And are you considering real broad impact and not just sort of, they published a lot of research journals talking to researchers, but not to anybody else? So there are multiple ways for broader impacts, but it's important that projects really think through that, and I think share some of your successes with one another about how you're doing broader impacts. And a lot of times that broader impact happens after your project is over. So it's great to hear from people whose projects ended when they get a book out or a nice article in a practitioner journal or press coverage, even more broader impact and being covered in actual press that regular people read, not just us, is even better. So thinking really broadly about what your broader impact could be, but also I think for those of us who are in the gatekeeper roles to think about making sure people get rewarded for that as well as their other work.
I just want to weigh in quickly, echo wholeheartedly everything that Karen has just said. Also note that in the planning of the agenda for this meeting, this was a strong theme. You noted yesterday's plenary, this morning, Sharon Lynch and Barbara Means and Julie Sarama, and I'm forgetting some, Phil was there too, all talking about this very issue, these things that Karen just talked about, front and center. So definitely agree. As a community, we have to think hard about these things. Cadre has a role to play in some of these kinds of issues. So these are hard challenges, but yeah, we have to keep working on it.
Thank you.
Here, Karen.
Hi, my name is Karen Trujillo, and I am from New Mexico State University and with the Math Snacks grant. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Math Snacks, we do animations and video games for middle level mathematics in English and Spanish. Our biggest issue right now is a lot of our games have been developed, 7, 8 years ago with old programming languages that are slowly but surely becoming obsolete. So even though we have millions of students and teachers all over the country and all over the world that use our products, as new computers come online, they may or may not be accessible anymore. So are there plans for the availability of funding for possibly reprogramming? And I spoke with someone at one of the poster sessions that was having a similar issue. And I know we've talked about, well, but that's not research, that's development, but they are research and development grants. So just wanted to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
I just have one thought on that. I mean, I think, you know, Chen Zuckerberg talked a little bit about this yesterday, but sort of this whole idea of commercialization and sort of you're working to develop something, but then sort of also thinking about what happens after the fact when there aren't federal funds. Like, how do you get to a place where perhaps the intervention is somewhat self-sustaining and maybe has some sort of a revenue stream that could keep it going, and that could help with these R&D efforts. I've seen some successful examples of this in education where they're sort of developing, particularly technology, where there is a revenue model that sort of helps to keep it going after the fact.
And we did go through the I-Corps grant.
That's good, yeah.
We did go through the I-Corps grant, and but in the end, we wanted available free to students and teachers, and commercialization really did not lend itself to keeping that model.
Anyone else have a comment on that? Or Nick?
I was just thinking actually about the reprogramming aspects and the relationship to STEM+C, but also the commercialization aspects of it. For example, if you look at it not from the perspective perhaps of fixing old things, but really looking at innovation itself, because computational work, I mean, the computers now, I mean, they're just changing dramatically. So rather than the reprogramming aspects, to look at how, when you're working in a dynamic environment like, you know, computing is, and I mean, there are new ways of doing computational work now that where the math and the algorithms are beginning to change. So I would look at it, you know, if you have your pulse, and it sounds like you do on that particular topical area, that you look really far out, further out than towards what is the future of computing, and how can you sort of propose how to get there now. You know, like what would be the building blocks that you would take and the approaches you would take towards doing that now to keep your focus on the frontier. And that also relates to a big idea, STEM+C+, which is the future of work in the human technology frontier, to kind of, that space of technology and computation and the STEM integration really sounds like where you are, and I think there could be some very interesting, innovative proposals coming out of that.
Thanks, Arlene. Great. Were you going to ask a? Well, I think you're up here first. We'll probably do 2 more questions, then I think we'll done.
I have a follow-up on that other one. I don't know if it matters, but I just wondered what NSF sees as its role in fostering sustainability, given the taxpayer money that's put out toward this really amazing work that happens here. And I think that being able to repurpose work toward new innovative ends is certainly something that we're all good at. But I'm also wondering what is the role of NSF in fostering that sustainability?
I don't think it does have that role. I don't think we have a funding stream for that role. We do have sort of sidebar aspects of it, so including things like SPIR, and this lady did refer to I-Corps for learning, which doesn't exist moving forward. So I'm not sure it's what we do. I think it's something for you as part of the taxpaying public to think how you might either petition your local Congress people about this, not necessarily to send money to NSF, but to ask how the government is thinking about their dollars with respect to these issues. It's hard for us to sit up here and to see good work and not be able to fund it. And there's plenty good work that we don't fund. I mean, we fund 1 in 10. So there's a lot of good stuff, or the potential for good things to permeate into the system that we don't touch at all.
So is there one other response on sustainability? Then I want to turn to our last question.
I'll just jump in and say, I mean, it's also, we are situated in the context, EHR is situated in the context of the broader NSF. And when you look at the broader NSF, the way in which sustainability of work happens is through the development of patents and then commercialization, those kinds of things. And so that context gives us particular kinds of constraints. And I think one of the things that's difficult in education right now is that we have moved to a market where people like to give away things for free, but free is not free. Free has costs. And so if you build a business model around not collecting dollars from the users, then you have to figure out what your alternative business model is going to be. And we don't, right now I think education is in a difficult position because we do have a lot of people working on free. And ultimately, in the past, the sustainability for projects has not been through free, it's been through commercialization. And so if, as a field, the movement is towards an alternative business model, I think we really need to be thoughtful about how that business model is going to create opportunities for sustainability, because right now free, so there's open education resources, but then how are those sustained? Ultimately, free is not free, and if your institution is not going to support sustainability, there has to be a pass-off. I mean, the thing I say often is the tagline for NSF is where discoveries begin, and then they go somewhere else. And so we have to figure out where the somewhere else is going to be, if it's, because it's not, we begin, but there's a primacy at the agency on innovation, which means we're pushing toward the frontier of the new, which pushes against sustainability as an agency culture.
And I want to turn to it.
Yeah, not stepping on the other question, just is it outside of NSF's charter to put things in solicitations that ask for sustainability plans or promote that notion within projects?
It's not outside of our charter.
So this could be other conversation later.
It's something that could be put in a proposal. We have solicitations that ask about sustainability plans. Yes?
I just wanted to return briefly to Sylvia's question, which I heard a practical question in there, which, I mean, broadening participation is such a challenging space. And for instance, Cadre has this topical study group on broadening participation, and there's some stuff being generated out of there. They're doing a brief for PIs and for researchers, which I think is quite important for how we theorize, how we begin to leverage ourselves better into this space and more effectively. And so I thought part of her question was about whether each program is working on this, and we're kind of bottom up developing ideas about how to effectively integrate that into our work. And so is there a way to learn across the different programs about how we're working on broadening participation? And so I thought there was a practical question around that specifically as well.
Well, I'll give part of the answer. I think that this will echo what Karen said earlier. So we certainly try to learn from our portfolios, and we think about what we could learn across programs. But again, I want to turn it back to everyone here in this room, that literally there are more of you than there are of us. We are very interested in receiving what I would call synthesis proposals at NSF that will look at results. That they could be within a program, they could be across programs. I'm pretty sure DRK-12 accepts synthesis proposals, right? Our core research program, ECR, accepts synthesis proposals. ASIL does, and so on. We would love to see more work in the field that would try to synthesize lessons learned, whether it's on broadening participation in STEM or any of the other synergies that you would find across projects. From the point of view of NSF, from the point of view of a taxpayer, perhaps, you're getting so much value, but by looking across projects, once you've already collected the data, there's so much we could learn. So I encourage everyone here to think about what they could do to synthesize, in addition to doing primary research. We would love to see more of that. And Since you mentioned cadre, I think that this is a good point to turn this back to cadre. I know everyone here will agree with me that this has not only been such a smooth running PI meeting, but it's been really a fascinating PI meeting. It's really been a joyful PI meeting. That this has just gone so well, and I wanted to take a moment for all of us to thank Catherine and her colleagues at cadre for what was turned out to be such a great experience for all of us.